Yes, I know it's only September, but we're getting Christmassy already. Stay tuned for a Christmas pudding beanie. For this project, I'm going to be using, it's quite an old yarn actually, it's been in my stash for ages, but it's Patterns Diploma Woolrich yarn. And the colour is, it's just a number, 6714. I'm going to be using a small amount of white Aran from my stash. And this bubbly wiggly yarn, which for the life of me, sorry guys, I really don't know what it's called. But again, that's in my stash. I've been given some wool and bits and bobs. And I've chosen to use this because it gives a kind of fuzzy snowy feel. So let's get on with the project. I'm going to cast on and do the cast on row and one knit row with the white Aran yarn, purely because the bubbly yarn I'm going to use is not very strong for pulling your beanie together when we come to assemble it at the end. And we're just going to knit one full row all the way around. Trim off our yarn and we'll change to our lovely bubbly yarn. Pop that on the floor there. Now, usually with this kind of yarn, the fuzziest side will end up on the inside of the work. So we'll find out where we go with this one now. So I'm going to zero my clock at this stage, because in the fuzzy yarn we want to do 24 rows. Okay, so we're going to start now and do 24 rows. And this is a little bit of an experiment for me as well, to find out how this fuzzy yarn works and turns out. So 24 rows and I will be back. Making sure it's going down there so we don't get any drop stitches. Don't forget to tie our ends together, making sure we got the right ones, not the cast on row, because they are very, very close together. Sometimes help to put a knot in the end of that before you cast on, because then you know which tail is which. But I forgot to do that. I'll be back when I get to 24 rows, guys. So far so good. Here we are on the final row, 24. Cut off our yarn. And we're going to change now to this Patterns Diploma Brown vintage yarn, I believe. Got one ball already prepared to go. And it's a DK weight yarn. I normally stick to an Aran, but and I did consider doing 2 strands of this yarn to double it up, but I'm sure the DK will be alright. Let's do it around. I like to tie my knots kind of early before I crank around, but that's just my style. You tie them off whenever you're ready. So now we changed colours. We're going to do 70 rows in the brown before we change back to the white in order to finish off the beanie. So I will crank around now and do 70 rows, and I will see you back for the next colour change. And I'm taking it slow to make sure that all the stitches catch nicely, and then we can go a little faster. Okay, 70 rows. Be back shortly. I just popped back on to show you what just happened to me as I was cranking my 70 rows. Look at that. The ball, a brand new ball, just ended. And I just got that little bit of a tuft left there, just enough for me to tie it off so I don't have to start the project again. So be careful, guys, alright? Always watch what's going through your yarn ball. I took my eye off the yarn for just a second and I ended up with that just enough to tie that row together. Oops. So to finish off the Christmas pudding beanie, I've switched back to the Aran white yarn that I used to cast on with, and that's purely to be economical with this fuzzy yarn, which I'm assuming is a little bit more expensive than your average Aran yarn or DK yarn if you're using DK. So 25 rows in the white, and then we shall cast off. So that's the 25 rows finished, and we're going to cast off now. And just a quick tip for anybody who's struggling with casting off, because I know many people do, with the curve of your needle pointing upwards, and if you can see the stitch there hanging on the two red pegs, put your needle flat in between those two red pegs there and just pick up the stitch. Just get a little screw at a point, that stitch there on the end, okay, just that white stitch there is all you want. Okay, so on the top of your yarn, in between those two pegs, and with the curved end pointing upwards, lift that stitch off. Okay, now take care, because as you can see on this stitch here, the needle has gone down. Okay, you can't see that needle anymore, so this one is a little vulnerable to popping off. So if you're super nervous and it's your first or second time of doing it, I sometimes put my finger over that one to keep it in place while I'm dealing with this one. So I'll crank on a little bit more, and again through there and up through that one. And that's a little safer because the needle hasn't gone right down underneath that stitch. So I won't worry too much about that one. But if you cranked on that far and you've got two vulnerable stitches there, and I'm only catching that one for instance, I would put my finger there and hold that one in place so you don't drop that stitch. So that's a little tip. Now I'll crack on with casting off, and we'll see you at the end. And when you get a little bit more proficient, you can pick up 1, 2, 3, 4 or more stitches. And I can guarantee you the more you do, you'll find yourself doing that in no time. Last 2 stitches, and the work is off the machine. So all we need to do now is to stretch our work. As you can see, the fuzziness really is more on the inside with these types of yarn, but there is a nice texture on the outside as well, and we'll be using that. So we need to stretch out our work now and secure all our joins on the inside to make sure they're secure, and I'll be back shortly and we will assemble the beanie and add our little decorations on the top to make it really Christmassy. See you in a minute. So now work is off the machine and ready to be assembled into your beanie shape. I decided to do a little bit of experimentation. Now I started off doing some duplicate stitch, but this fuzzy yarn is not very accommodating to duplicate stitch. So what I wanted to do was to make it look as if the cream or the sauce on the top of the pudding was dripping down the side of the cake part of the pudding, if that makes sense. So what I ended up doing, because duplicate stitch just didn't work out for me at all, not with this yarn anyway, is that I've just, I'm taking my needle in from the back of the work and I'm just ad hoc embroidering really across the yarn in various shapes and that, as if the cream was running down the side of the cake, of the Christmas pud. And that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm doing horizontal stitches of various sizes. And again, this is completely optional, you don't have to. The beanie will look just as nice with a straight line. See, this yarn is very claggy and does clag up a lot, and that's what I was getting when I was doing the duplicate stitch, so I kind of gave up on that then. I decided to get the look that I was after by just more or less embroidering ad hoc in the opposite direction. So that's what I'm going to continue to do to make mine look a little bit more like drippy sauce, but by all means there's no need to do that. And if of course you have opted to do just the plain ordinary Aran yarn there, you'll get a cleaner line in order to do duplicate stitch. So you could work from 5 stitches up and then gradually go up to nothing and then down again in various wriggly wiggly lines to suit yourself. But this is what I've decided to do, and again, entirely up to you whether you want to follow my lead and do that. But my stitches are completely ad hoc and all over the place. There's no plan to it at all. It's wherever this really strange fuzzy yarn takes me. And there you go, that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to carry on doing that now all around the beanie as it knots at every conceivable chance it gets. And what I'm aiming for is that kind of effect all around the edge of my beanie. Various curves, various drippy marks all the way along. I'm going to carry on with that now, and then I'll join you to assemble the beanie as we would normally. So now that I finished doing my embroidery, bringing my little drippy pieces down the side of the beanie there and onto the cake of the Christmas pudding, it's just now time to assemble our beanie as we would normally by pulling one inside the other and tying the ends together, securing with some knots and stitches. There's our Christmas pudding beanie, more or less finished. As you can see, those add a little bit more texture to the edge there, showing that the cream, custard or whatever you want to call it, as brandy butter, has dribbled down the side. Again, that's an optional thing, you don't have to do that, you just leave it straight across the top, nice, easy and simple, okay? But my embroidery there is very ad hoc, it's all over the place, just filling in the gaps there, up and down, left and right, all over the place. I don't profess to be any kind of embroiderer by hand at all, so forgive my ad hoc way of doing things. So I'm just going to hide the tails now inside there, add a few stitches, and then we'll come back and we'll add our holly and our berries on the top and finish her off. I've included a template of the holly leaf for you to use, which you can download. There we have our holly leaf cut out, and we need 3 of those. To make my pom-poms, I'm using first choice chunky yarn. It's only 99p from my local Home Bargains. And now we're going to make the pom-poms for our project. I've made 2 already here. I'm using a generic version of, I believe it's the Clover pom-pom makers. It's the smallest one in the range. And I got these from Amazon. I've already cut off a length of the red yarn so I can tie the pom-pom when I've finished, and I'm just going to take the yarn and wrap it around both ends, fold it in on itself, trim so I can put the cord around, tie it off. I like to fill mine quite full because I like a nice full pom-pom. When we secure, open up our ends and pull the pom-pom maker apart, releasing our lovely red pom-pom. Excellent. And now all we need to do is to trim our pom-pom to make it look like the other two. When you're happy with your pom-pom, you'll have a little pile of debris and a nice round pom-pom. And there's our 3 pom-poms done, ready to attach to the top of our Christmas pudding beanie. After I made my pom-poms, I decided to trim them down slightly. As you can see, there are 2 that have been trimmed down to smaller, and that was the original size, which is a little bit too chunky. So what I did for that was I cut 2 little circles to the size I wanted, and I sandwich it there where the tail is, and sandwich it opposite, and I'll move that out of the way, otherwise it'll get covered in little bits of red fluff. I'm making it as central as possible so they match up. Then I just trim around, okay? So I do it in one direction. I'll just do it roughly here for you to see now how I try to make mine squarer, and they do slip, so be careful. So hold it tightly, making sure not to trim your tails off, which I also did on one of mine. Be careful around there. And then take that off, and then what we do is we squash it the other way then. So we'll sandwich it this way. That way, and you can see your tufties hanging off there, and we trim it that way, which takes it down quicker than doing it by eye, but you'll still need to tidy it up just a little bit, okay? But I thought I'd just show you that. I mean, we're going big and bold with our decorations on the top. We are going to make sure that those holly leaves and those berries can be seen from afar, but by all means make smaller ones if you feel they're a little bit too big and bold for you. So we shake that out. As you can see, that's trimmed it down quite nicely, apart from just rounding it off a little bit. Takes the bulk of the cutting down. There we go. So I'll tidy him up a little bit more now around the edges to match the other 2, and we'll move on to our holly leaves. So I've got my holly leaf here, and I have got a darning needle with a point on it, not the dull-ended one. This one's actually got a point on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that tail up there to give it a little bit more substance, and just attach a length of green yarn to the bottom of it like that. So we can thread it through. So we can thread it through the top of the beanie and attach it securely then. I've done the other 2 already. There we go. So we've got 1, 2 and our 3 leaves ready to go onto the top of our beanie. I'm going to switch over now to a dull-ended needle in order to attach them to the top of the beanie. So with our beanie in place and our first holly leaf, and by all means, if you're a good hand crocheter, you could crochet leaves as well, of course, and do your own ones. I did try making them by knitting them, but all I ended up with was just an ordinary leaf. I couldn't get it to manipulate into a holly leaf shape adequately enough, so I've opted to go with felt, which is easily available to everybody, of course. So we're just going to thread the 3 of them through, and then we'll arrange them to suit our needs at the top there. 1, 2 and 3. Like I said, I'm going big and bold on these. You can cut these down to a smaller size if you prefer, or you could even use the silk version of them that you get on Christmas decorations. Just cut them off like I did with the leaves that I used on the trailing ivy pumpkin stack. So there's our leaves there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fasten them inside the beanie like that, and then we'll attach our 3 berries. This is going to be big and bold. What I opted to do at the end was to just tie them off together on the inside of the beanie into a nice bow in case I wanted to remove them later. And as the beanie is inside out at the moment, I thought I'd show you how it looks without all the embellishments and just using a plain ordinary yarn both sides. It looks just as good, doesn't it? So by all means carry on using those yarns and just add your embellishments on the top there. It'll look just as Christmassy. And now we're going to add our Christmas berries on the top to finish the project off. So as we would normally add a pom-pom, I'm just going to thread one end through and the other end through, and I'm going to knot them off underneath like I did with the leaves. And that way, if you do decide you want to remove them, it's just a case of undoing the knot. I'm going to do 2 berries at the front and 1 berry at the rear. Just going to knot those off. And a nice little bow. You could use those toggles and those buttons that are available as well to hold them in place. I think they're available on Etsy. I think I've seen them on there. Or Amazon, I think. I'll trim that later. And there you go, there's 1 bobble. I'll carry on now and add the other bobble there, and I'm going to put 1 bobble on the back. So when you're wearing it, some people can see that there's a nice little berry at the back as well. And there we are, there's our finished Christmas pudding beanie. In the end, I opted to put the 3 at the front. Oh well, what can I say? The back looks nice just as the back. And I thought, well, berries are usually grouped in 3s. So I went along with 3 at the front of the beanie. So what do you think of that? Like I said, you don't have to do these embellishments at the front here to make it look like the cream or the brandy sauce is dripping down, but I kind of like it. I think it was worth the effort on my part anyway. But let me know how you get on. I hope you enjoy this project, and if you make it, please tag me. I'm on Instagram, CraftyKaz33, and Kaz Harris on Facebook and things like that. But it's great to have you with me, and an early Merry Christmas to you all. I know it's still September, but hey, anybody who's prepping for those Christmas markets can maybe do these as part of their inventory. Okay, and if this pattern is of use to you, if you'd like to make a small donation to an animal charity close to you, that would be absolutely awesome, because that's a thing that's really, really close to my heart. As you know, we've got 7 rescue dogs along with many, many other rescue animals here. Okay, so take care and I'll see you next time. All the best. Bye for now.